Welcome to the Angus Report. I'm your host, Clint Mefford. Join us this week for the latest cattle news and education. This month, we'll be focusing on cattle care and handling, part of the association's belief statement, Raising Standards. We visit a Tennessee Angus operation who strongly implements beef quality assurance guidelines. We learn about the 2 foot score EPDs for Angus cattle, and we hear from an expert on modern cattle handling practices. This is the Angus Report. Deer Valley Farms, an Angus seed stock operation in Fayetteville, Tennessee, is committed to quality and cattle care. As the general manager of Deer Valley, Jonathan Perry understands the importance for beef cattle producers to be consumer-minded in their everyday practices. Beef quality assurance certification is one way Perry is able to add value to his cattle, while at the same time serving as a platform to showcase Deer Valley's commitment to superior handling practices and transparency to end users.
As an Angus community, we've always looked at ourselves as a beef producing entity that produces one of the highest quality products in the world. But we have not always looked at ourselves as a producer of consumer products. And today's message has to be sent from the American Angus breeders to the public that we take the highest precaution in everything we do, and that we enact the strictest standards for treating those animals and handling those animals as they're raised and sent to market. The beauty of BQA is that, those standards were put together by cattle producers, by veterinarians, by industry people. So we have the ability to lay out the guidelines in a practical manner that doesn't affect or impede our production every day. We're not having to follow activist standards or people that don't have an oversight or a view of what we do every day and don't understand how those things should work in our everyday life. Our operation is only as valuable as the crew that's on it. Everything that happens on a daily basis here is driven by the strong, reliable crew that we have. Obviously, on an operation of our size, I can't do it all. There's no way I could ever get across it. But I have a tremendous, reliable staff. They're all BQA certified, and it's very important that they understand those recommendations and those protocols when it comes to working and managing our livestock. It's absolutely important for producers to stay up with the certification and continue to follow the manual and follow the guidelines. The neat thing about the BQA certification process is, we just had our entire crew recertified not long ago, and our entire crew has grown up in this business. They do it every day, have done it for years, and you think, well, why we got to go through this again? We know it all, but it's amazing. Every time we go through that process, there's a point somewhere in there where we hit that aha moment, or that moment where we say, hey, I never thought about that. Hey, I didn't see that before. And so with the industry changing and they're constantly updating those guidelines, it's amazing during the recertification process what you'll pick up on. One of the things that we've got to remember as producers is that the perception out there for our industry is based off of facts that people don't have. And we have to remember to sell the message that, cattle still live on grass. They still live out in the pasture. They still have a comfortable life here. Beef quality assurance is much like everything else in this industry. We do a lot of things this way because that's the way our fathers did it, that's the way our grandfathers did it, and we think it's the right way. But in a lot of cases in agriculture today, time and science and just experience has taught us that maybe there's a better way. And so as time passes, as more information evolves and more science evolves, we've had to learn to look at things a little different than maybe our grandfathers did or our fathers did. And by doing that, hopefully the next generation can watch us, my children, your children, can watch what we do and realize that, we're constantly looking for ways to make this business better. We're constantly looking for ways to make it more sustainable, constantly looking for ways to make it more prosperous.
Stay with us. We'll be back with more from Jonathan Perry and Deer Valley Farms after a break. Welcome back. As we continue the conversation about beef quality assurance, Deer Valley Farms reminds us that proper cattle care starts with proper facilities.
Where we're at here in Middle Tennessee this year, we're obviously at record annual rainfall. We've had to do as much precaution as we can to keep our pens dry and drained. Obviously, excess mud, excess water sure brings on foot issues and foot rot and certain things. So, you know, you definitely want to make an effort to keep your pens as dry and clean. Start with a set of pens on the top of a hill that drains well is always a very good recommendation. And then we try to make certain that we have a gravel base underneath the pens that keeps some compaction to the ground and allows the water to run off, but keeps a solid footing under the cattle. Another thing that we have to consider here in Middle Tennessee and in many parts of the world, in the summer months when it's really hot and really humid, we have to manage our time very well that we don't have cattle standing up in the pens and on the hillside where it's really hot in the middle of the day. We start very early in the morning when we're working cows in the summertime. We try to be done by 9, 10 o'clock at the latest. If we don't finish that day, we try to start back 6 or 7 o'clock in the afternoon and try to ensure that those cattle are never left up in a real heat sensitive time of the year and stressed and put through excess heat. When we're transporting the cattle after we work them or getting them to the working pens, we always try to make certain that we get that done very early in the morning, very late in the evening, so that we're not moving those cattle or pushing those cattle during the heat of the day where they can encounter excess stress and excess heat.
Perry also notes the importance of proper record keeping and cattle identification.
One of the things you want to pay attention to when you get ready to work cattle is it's always very nice and easy to have everything set up, everything organized, and everything ready before you get cattle in the chute. You load the chute, you're not prepared, cattle got to stand there longer, they got to get uneasy and rough each other up, and that's not a good situation. So if your supplies and your vaccines are laid out and ready and you're organized and ready to go, it just makes your day move swifter. It's much easier on the cattle and much easier on the help. We try to organize our supplies in a box that has different compartments in it where we can separate needles and syringes and blood cards and different medicines. Keep a jug around for used needles to dispose of them. Records, most important part of the whole deal. If you don't keep records, it's pretty hard to keep up with what you're doing. One of the main things that we keep records for, obviously, is so that we have permanent records from calving all the way to the day they're sold of every injection they've ever had, every vaccine they've ever had, every antibiotic they've ever had. One of the very beneficial things to those records is people forget withdrawal periods. We have a record of everything they've ever had when they've come through the chute. If we have an animal that has to be taken to town or marketed for some reason or another, we have record of every injection they've had, what the withdrawal period should be. We can go back and look those up, and we've got dates of injection right here at our fingertips all the time. Obviously, identification is a huge factor in our business. We can't keep records, we can't keep traceability records if we don't have identification. Over the years, there's multiple ways to identify animals, brands, tattoos, brisket tags, ear tags, multiple ways. We always tattoo every animal here, but in modern times, we've gone to an electronic identification tag. We don't have issues with the hair growing over the tattoo in the ear or the brand not taken and not being able to read part of the brand. So we use these permanent electronic identification tags, and that number is entered into our paper records and our electronic records in the computer system, so that from the day that animal is tagged here to the day it leaves, goes on to any other location or to harvest, it has that identification tag in its ear, and we can pull that record at any minute.
We check in now on the latest cattle market news with the Cattlefax update.
Hello and welcome to the Cattlefax update. I'm Tanner Ahearn. As you might imagine, the growing U.S. economy since the Great Recession has been very positive for both the beef and restaurant industries. The National Restaurant Association releases a monthly Restaurant Performance Index, or RPI value, which is one way of measuring the current and future state of the food service segment. The most recent value from December came in at 101.6, and it's worth noting that any point above 100 indicates an expansion environment. In fact, since September 2016, the RPI has exceeded the 100-point level every month, creating a steep short-term uptrend. Consequently, competition has aggressively escalated within the growing food service sector. One way for restaurants to garner more market share is to feature higher quality items such as beef on the menus. It is evident this strategy is being implemented when analyzing the data. The Black Box Intelligence Agency reports monthly restaurant sales, customer traffic, and spending. The year-over-year change in per-person spending has been positive since 2012, while the change in customer traffic has actually been negative during the majority of that same time. Simply, fewer customers are entering the restaurants, but when they set foot in the door, they are willing to spend more money. It is likely that customers are willing to pay for the higher quality and more expensive products like beef and seafood, rather than the cheaper competing proteins. Restaurant performance is significantly impacted by the position of the U.S. economy. If disposable incomes continue to rise, the unemployment rate remains depressed, and other economic indicators remain positive, the outlook for the general economy will remain optimistic. As a result, sustained restaurant growth will be supportive to beef demand going forward. For the Angus Report and Cattlefax, I'm Tanner Ahearn.
To learn more about Cattlefax, your leading source for beef industry market information, visit cattlefax.com. Next on the Angus Report, we learn about the 2 FootScore Research EPDs for Angus cattle. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. The American Angus Association has been collecting foot scores for Angus cattle since 2015. This data collection allowed for the release of 2 FootScore Research EPDs, reaffirming Angus breeders' commitment toward genetic progress.
We came about launching this FootScore Research EPD. It was really a recommendation from the membership. We heard feedback from the members that said that they were having issues and they were seeing issues in their females, in their other progeny that are out basically in production. It was an issue that was identified by our members, brought back to us at the association, and we created an initiative around that to basically try to put out a genetic selection tool for them. So it was really member driven. It was from them, worked their way all the way up through the board of directors, and then was an initiative that was placed on our plate at AGI.
American Angus Association is the first breed association in the United States to start to collect this data and hopefully have a genetic prediction in the future. And so the need for the information and the phenotypes of what the foot scores hopefully will accomplish will give somebody a selection tool to use and increase the longevity of Angus cattle.
So in general, it's really important for us to start to record this foot structure data, not only to create a genetic analysis, but really to make sure that we have cattle out there, not only in the Angus breed, but really in the beef industry as a whole, who are structurally sound, who can stay and remain in the herd for a long period of time and remain productive. Obviously, that's a huge trait that each one of our members analyze and take into account. Something like structure, are these cattle structurally sound? Because it's a limiting factor for as long as they can stay in the herd. If you have something that's lame or you have something that's out there and it can't move about to graze or can't move about to go get water, obviously that's going to be a detriment to your overall production efficiency. What we have out for producers to use, we have foot scoring guidelines. So basically, we have 2 traits that we collect for. The one's going to be foot angle and the other's going to be claw set. We score these cattle for both of those traits on a 1 through 9 scale. Basically, when we analyze claw set, what we're looking at is how symmetrical are those toes, right? Do we have toes that curl in towards each other or basically are divergent? If they're divergent or basically we have a lot of spread in the middle of those toes, we're going to score those cattle more towards the 1 scoring system for claw set. If we have toes that are completely curling over one another, basically they're going to end up on the other side of the spectrum and be more towards a score of a 9. When we look at something like foot angle, basically what we're looking at is we're looking at depth of heel, length of toe, things like that, and really what is their angle of their pasturing to the ground. So again, 5 is going to be is going to be ideal when we think about a 45-degree angle, toes that are short and symmetrical and some heel depth there. If we think about cows that are very soft on their patterns or have a lot of angle to the ground, they're going to be more on the side of the 9. If we have animals that are basically very straight up through their pastern and their knee, they're going to be on the scoring side of the system of a 1.
There are some recommendations in capturing this information. I think it's important to be mindful of. Obviously, it needs to be taken on a hard surface, maybe a scraped alleyway or a concrete alleyway. Realize not everyone has concrete to work off of, but something that they can see the claw set easily. They can evaluate the depth of heel easily, and then the toe length to capture those scores. A lot of questions have been, can we do it in a chute? And I say yes and no. I think you can evaluate claw set pretty accurately with the animal standing in a chute. I do think to see the heel depth, you want to see those bulls and females standing naturally and moving naturally. And so to have them outside the chute in an alleyway would be a lot simpler. We're going to score the worst foot, the poorest foot for each trait. One of the recommendations for time frame in terms of turning in that information, for the yearling data, both bulls and heifers have to be at least 320 days of age. AGI will accept that information. After that, it's going to be tied back to their contemporary group. And so we realize that the bulls, there's probably a fairly short window. Once they hit a year of age, they're not going to be on the ranch anymore. And so we're mindful of that, but on the females, I think it's a good opportunity to maybe capture that data 2 to 3 different times over the period of their life. So possibly as a yearling heifer, and then again sometime as a young female once she's in production.
So when we talk about the differences between the environment and basically the genetic interactions for foot score, we really rely on our heritability estimates. When we look at the heritability of both foot angle and claw set, we're at a 25% heritability. And so what that heritability means is basically about 25% of it is controlled by the genetics, where 75% of that trait is influenced by the environment. So it's basically a moderately heritable trait. Can we make genetic progress with it through EPD selection? Of course we can, but it's not all due to the hereditary of that particular trait, right? There's still things like, how do we feed these animals? What types of climates are they in? What types of weather do we have? Were they under rocky ground conditions, things like that? They're going to affect the overall foot structure, but there definitely is a genetic component to this that we can make some progress.
Visit angus.org for more information about foot score guidelines and to view a list of published EPDs on AI sires. Up next, we hear from an expert on modern cattle handling practices. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Angus Report. As a doctor of veterinary medicine, Tom Knopfsinger's main goal is to encourage producers to look at every interaction with their cattle as a positive experience and a potential to make the cattle and people better by promoting modern handling practices.
Most important benefit to training cattle to work for you is human safety. We just cannot take the chance of someone getting seriously injured or killed working cattle. That's a really special focus. The other production and health advantages are we have no idea what is the cost of anxiety. To removing homeostasis from animals as they change addresses results in all kinds of dehydration. Levels of cortisol, levels of adrenaline, levels of norepinephrine go up, and the immune system is crippled. And then we have animals that are sick from diseases that should not be an effect.
Knopfsinger says the goal of working cattle is not to gentle animals, but to find a way to keep them sensitive and responsive. One of the best ways to do this is to understand the differences of working them from their left eyes versus their right eyes.
We've recently learned that the first time we meet cattle, it's really important that we give them the choice and let them do what they'd like to do and greet us from the left eye the first time. If cows have a choice, they'll always stand like this the first time you meet them. And then we can teach them to work, and if we want to show the animals that they can move as a family, move as a herd, it saves so much time if we position ourselves to create counterclockwise motion so that left eye remains in contact with us. After we've done that several times or several days, then it's easy to switch eyes, and we can teach them to do the same thing off the right eye. The reason those are so predictable is that the optic nerves cross, and the brain functions are different, left side versus right side, and whatever input goes into this left eye of this cow or horse goes over to the right or more logical cognitive side of the brain. In contrast, what goes in the right eye goes over to the more reflexic or reactionary side of the brain. So if you're working with range cattle, you probably will always save time by being here. If it's a Holstein or animals like this that have been handled a lot, it's okay to be over on this side, and you can kind of bring them up a little bit. If an effective leader is leading people or leading cattle, it's really, really soothing to those being led that the leader is available. It's really, really hard to lead people or lead animals from behind. And so it's so important to do that. If in fact they get reward and can establish and use their instincts, they become so much more honest, and they're telling us their true state of health. This has been the amazing thing, is that if they do not trust us, they're the biggest liar in the animal kingdom. And so they will say, I'm fine, until they just can't hide lameness or illness any longer.
Creating positive interactions at birth is one of the most important times to consider reducing stress and creating positive interactions. Knopfsinger says promoting a strong maternal bond during this time can translate into improved behavior at weaning.
Absolutely preserve the first hours of life. Birth is still one of the biggest miracles in biology. So our goal then is to have the mother so calm that the colostrum is dripping out of her, and that baby so calm that it takes almost no effort for him to nurse and receive as much colostrum as possible. So creating a really strong maternal baby bond that first few minutes is critical. So that we would never try, if we thought we needed to get that calf tagged or identified and he hasn't drank 3 gallons of colostrum, we would never interrupt that behavior until we know he had adequate passive transfer. If that mother doesn't want us to tag its baby, we're not going to tag it. We don't need to tag a calf so the mother knows which one's hers. And in a few days, we can simply walk her down if she's very, very protective, and put them in a little small pen and let her out and put the baby back there, and we can tag him. A lot of ranches now, we don't tag any babies at birth. We tag them all at branding time. If we treat a baby on the calving ground, really important that we tag the ones we treat for antibiotic records, and so that you could send one of your teammates to go check on number 12. The benefits, the return on investment of removing stress is almost always directly measured by increases in feed intake and water intake. This is a big mystery, and we used to be satisfied with feed yard arrival cattle eating 1% of their body weight in dry matter for a few days. That's not even enough to sustain their maintenance requirements. If we do some of these things as we unload the cattle, as we greet the cattle, as we acclimate the cattle, all of a sudden those intakes go from 1% to 2.5%. All of a sudden we've got enough to nourish those animals, create homeostasis, and create positive immune function, erase hypoglycemia, hypoproteinemia, and we have an animal that's strong and productive and can resist disease.
Well, we thank Tom for his continued education as it pertains to cattle care and handling. And that's a wrap for this week's Angus Report. Tune in next week for industry-leading news and education, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Angus TV, for more highlights from the association. See you next week.